Hello, I'm Lester Knutsen, one of the founders of the International Informix User Group and producer of these Tech Talks. This section, part 3 of the history of Informix user groups, covers 1997 to the year 2000. Informix user groups and the International User Group had taken off. There were over 34 Informix user groups around the world. We want to share with you the key role the IIUG had in getting the Informix port to Linux, getting better technical content at the Informix User Conference, and in the development of the local user group leadership council. For this discussion, we'd also like to welcome Fred Hubbard, one of the past IIUG presidents. So Fred, why don't you say hello and tell us how you got involved in the Informix User Group?
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I saw you all in part 1 and started on part 2, um, and it brought a lot of memories back. I started, with technology back in the early 80s with a competitor of Informix at the time, and we fought them fiercely in Argentina. And then I came to the US and I went to work for a consulting company whose main client was Informix Software. So I had to jump into the bandwagon servicing customers that were Informix clients. And at the time, I brought the mentality of the Unix community and thought it's kind of interesting that in the Bay Area where Informix is based, there's really no local Informix users group. So I started working on that effort, I would say 90, and that's what brought me forth.
So Fred, how did you get involved in the IIUG?
So once the users group started coming together in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had a little bit of a unique position because I was based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Informix themselves were my client. I I thought this provided a really cool opportunity, particularly as it started to come up in Tampa, to do something more interesting and more relevant to the community that you know, was sort of voiceless in my perspective. I mean, there were people who would talk to the vendor about the product, but typically not from the perspective of the hands-on technician using the product. That vision of what IIUG could become as a powerful advocate for the user and eventually for the client, because there's a difference, right? Um, was what got me going. And I remember getting in trouble in Tampa um, when I asked the question to Phil. So when are you going to support the Informix Users Group? And I remember my boss slapping me down later on for embarrassing Phil on stage. Um, I think that was Tampa. It may have been San Jose. I'm not certain.
Ones. Uh, what were some of the critical issues that the IIUG dealt with during this time?
Perspective, that San Francisco board meeting is when I took over from Walt as IIUG president, and I served one term. Um, and during that time, we decided that one of the key focuses, and perhaps the key focus, was going to be on the user conference, and I believe it was scheduled for Seattle. Um, and what we wanted to do is have an impact on the user conference with the content. So we worked very closely with Mary Castellone and her team, who were just absolutely wonderful people. Um, and at the same time, we started putting together the bits and pieces of the Informix User Group Leadership Council, the Advocacy Council, and so forth, and just started gathering ideas and parts and pieces, because this was really the first year that we were quote in business, if you will. So we were laying the groundwork for what the organization was going to do, as an active organization from there. And I just remember rolling into the Seattle conference, which is where we kicked off the IIUG technical track. If memory serves, I'd have to go back and check, but I believe that's where we kicked off the IIUG technical track, because the conference committee trusted us enough to try. Though they gave us the smallest of all of the rooms, and they were always oversubscribed. People were out in the hallway and down the hall and everything else. So I think partway through the meeting, they were scrambling to stick us in larger rooms. But that process, that conference process, continued under Fred and others all the way through the San Francisco conference or the San Diego conference in 1999, where we had two tracks. We not only had the technical track, but we also had a data management track, which was more business oriented. And so there was that, and then advocacy, which we can talk about whenever you want to dive into that. But that was my perspective. Fred eventually became president. He did a wonderful job. He had a sense of politics, the ability to talk and deal with people wherever they fell in the organization. He well represented us to Informix, and I'm not saying other presidents didn't, but I got to work very closely with him because I was on the board all the way up till 2000, and from my perspective, he did a phenomenal job.
I want to add something on the technical track, because what I remember was the early Informix user conferences were tons of great technical material. They were super good. And then about 94, 95, they became marketing conferences. There was one conference which was like all marketing, I felt like. And I think that was what you guys did, was to turn it back to a technical user conference. As a user, I remember going to one of those conferences and saying, why am I going to this conference if they're just going to sell me stuff? I want to learn. And you, that was one of the gifts you guys did and brought to Informix.
It was definitely a team effort that one year that I was more involved than the others. Everybody was involved in some form, and so it was truly a group effort.
Now, let me jump back to Fred. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
You know, I was thinking that was the time when the heft of IIUG and its membership started to become relevant to Informix. And they did acknowledge the failure of the conference from a content perspective. And they acknowledged our ability to field constructive input from our user base, from our membership. And they sort of gave us a try with that one track. And I remember distinctly how successful it was, how extremely well attended it was, and how surprised the Informix executives were. They just did not, they had not expected it.
And wasn't that about the same time that the leadership at Informix had a big turnover? The executive leadership happened in early '98. So those things coincided. Don't know whether there was any dependency there, but certainly the new leadership was able to see what Fred just described.
That was a time when the array of products was also in question. What was the strategy, the product strategy going forward? And of course, by then we were starting to look at business intelligence through the accumulation of massive amounts of data. And we were looking at graphical user interfaces and the rise of the web and all these directions that were becoming tough for Informix management and other companies as well to really bring together into a cohesive set of products. That was that was a very, very interesting time. And I believe IIUG provided a tremendous amount of stability to the product during that period. We not, I was not a technician, so I wasn't talking to Informix in the terms you guys were, but um, I certainly remember how important we became to the customer base because we looked like we knew what we were talking about and we were representing their interests, even if, it wasn't, say, Hyatt Hotels who was speaking to Informix. It was someone who worked at Hyatt who was talking to Informix, along with someone who worked at Emory University, along with somebody who worked at, whatever, American Airlines at, or Walmart, who was a huge client at the time. And I'm very proud of the fact that our membership carried that message very, very eloquently and stood up to very complex dialogue with the technical, gurus of Informix and redefining, polishing, sometimes questioning pretty frontally what they were telling us they wanted to do.
Particularly around data warehouse, sometime in that time period, I can't remember, the Red Brick acquisition occurred. So there was this huge division within Informix. There were those that wanted to take the Inman approach, the relational approach. There were then the Red Brick people with the Kimball Starflake approach. And I distinctly remember us as a group sitting down and telling Informix, you can have both. There are places where one is better than the other, but inside Informix there is this big war, and they were trying to kill one off over the other, and it was a real mess. Um, but we were pretty strong in what we told Informix needed to be done. Sometimes they listened, and sometimes they didn't.
Well, and that was also when XPS was developed.
Right,
And I
right.
I remember during that period there were some big sites running XPS, on hundreds of computers. Uh, with back then they were massive databases. Uh, just and they were able to do that because they could put one database across multiple computers.
Mhm.
So let me dive into the Linux port. And Carlton and Fred, because this is one of my topics that's dear to me. uh, Back then, everything was done on Sun, and Linux was just coming out. What do you guys remember about how? Because I think the IIUG had a definite influence on Informix and the Linux port.
Oh yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll take that one for a little bit because that was, I don't want to say it was my baby because it wasn't per se. I was the chair of the advocacy committee. That came up a year, maybe a little bit after a year, when I stepped down as president. But there was a user out of Florida, Tim Schaefer, who approached the IIUG and said, "We need to port to Linux." And like everybody else, what is Linux? It's this little toy and so forth. But he was adamant that we needed to go to IBM and we needed to tell them, that they needed to port to Informix. And he advocated a scorched earth approach. He was going to hammer them over the head and beat them 5 ways from Sunday and yell and scream and everything else. And I was trying to be the diplomat and talk them through it. But it was literally a year to 2 years of almost weekly meetings between myself and Tim and Informix, convincing them that Linux was not a toy, because they, Informix, wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. So we went through and built business cases for them. We did case studies for them. We did all sorts of work over this year to 18-month period. And finally, they decided, okay, maybe there's a market here. Maybe there's something we can do. Um, so we went in, and I can't remember which event it was at, but they said, okay, we're going to port and release standard engine on Linux. and we'll see how that works. And out in the archive, you should have a picture of the Linux announcement, so perhaps you can put that in there. But Informix came out and said, we're not only porting to Linux, but we're releasing today. And here's the first release of it. And Informix was the first major vendor to port and or release on Informix. And we were all excited that it was going to happen. That same afternoon, Oracle came out and said, oh yeah, we're going to port to Linux by the end of the year. And of course, all the press focused on Oracle and the fact that they were going to release as opposed to Informix and all the work we'd done, and that it was available today. So we were a little bit chapped about that. But Standard Engine went out, people picked it up, all of a sudden people started using it, and Informix kind of changed their tune and eventually ported all the products to Linux. And today it's perhaps the most popular platform within IBM for Informix.
I think a key thing I remember is getting CDs back then. When I was cleaning up my office and moving, I had CDs of the first ports of Informix XPS on Linux, Informix Online on Linux. It was, you know, a great way to get your. This was before developer software, and it was the best way for a developer to get a database software and learn how to use it.
I remember that effort on Linux brought about a degree of impassionate discourse within IIUG that at times was a little scary because it was extremely frank and direct, and it certainly had no political varnishing.
Yeah.
And what was great, though, is that we continued to be friends. We argued and we fought over what the business value was. But then as a group, we made the decision and we moved on. And the next time the fight came up, we dealt with it again and made perhaps some other decisions. But we continued to focus and work together as a group, irrespective of differences, and respected those. And I think it made us stronger because we looked at everything from every possible perspective. And like I said, I thought it was a great organization back then, and it still is today. I'm just saying it was really great to be involved in that.
So another little bit of technology I remember from back then, and Mike, you were involved in this, so this may be a question for you, is we moved the Informix list from Walt's system to Major Domo. And didn't we move it to your server, or did we move it straight to an IIUG server then?
No, we at that point in time I was still running it on the server that was at UCAR, and then it wasn't that much later that we moved it to a different server.
And what do you remember about that different server? Because that was the first IIUG server. I remember as a Sun server, I think Sun gave the IIUG.
Yeah, the original IIUG.org was run on my workstation, my Sun
Yeah.
workstation. But then we were able to port it to, I don't even recall what flavor of Sun. This is the thing where you don't remember. It was a long ago. But yeah, we were able to move everything from my workstation to the new server. And yeah, that included the FTP server, the web services, all of those things, including the email list servers that were run via Majordomo.
And I want to emphasize this because I think this helped build the community. The fact that you had a free email server list that you could join and get information. You had a free FTP archive with hundreds of people contributing free software to. Um, and these are all the benefits of the work you guys did.
Wasn't that second Sun server at your place physically, or else at your ISP's? 'Cause I
Yeah,
thought
Yeah, it was so. I worked at a place called UCAR, University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. At first, it was on my desk, so literally on my desk. The second time, it was in one of their large server rooms.
Yeah. So there was a separate system that was IIUG.org at some point.
Correct.
And at some point in all this, maybe it was the beginning or maybe when you transitioned to the server, you were tunneling through my personal internet account because I remember having to configure the Usenet interface back and forth so that you could work through and post and receive the CDI information. And you know, at some point, I had to turn that off and turn that back over to you guys. But I just remember we got out the baling wire and the duct tape to hold the whole thing together.
Yeah, it was kind of a house of cards there for a while.
Days. Fred, as when you were president, what do you remember as the key things that happened?
You know, what I was thinking was that we started having increased international presence. That became a major effort of IIUG because we had been very US centric, and all of a sudden we're starting to have folks communicating with IIUG and folks who had significant um, user group activities, conferences, events happening all around the world. And that included, folks who eventually came into the board of directors, including folks from Switzerland and from Australia, of course. I mean, Gavin. Uh, when did Gavin come in? I mean, it was pretty early.
He,
I
he
He
was
was
remember.
the
on.
original.
He was one of the
Yeah,
original. Yeah,
yes, he was, and I remember Nils Mikkelbusch from Iceland, right?
Norway.
Or Norway. Okay, Norway, and then Ben Israel out of Israel. Um,
And Ben is still on the board.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
So
he's
I think that was something that we worked on, and Malcolm Whelans pushed and pushed and pushed, and fortunately he was connected enough in Europe to make some of those folks a little bit more aware about what we were doing. That was pretty fruitful.
One of the other things that occurred in this time period was the growth of the User Group Leadership Council as a mechanism to collect this international feedback from user groups all over so that they could provide a consolidated opinion for us on the board to carry out to Informix. And it also became, at least the goal was for it to become a leadership training mechanism to develop the next generation of IIUG leaders. And that was occurring during this time period as well.
Yes, and of course we were very fortunate that this very impassionate kernel of people that you all guys were part of in the early 90s really ramped up very quickly into the late 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, I can't remember the number of people that we now had in our membership lists, but it was thousands, and we started with 40, 60, 80, and all of a sudden we're seeing this traffic blossom and the responses coming in. When did the first newsletter go out? It might have been later, but we started producing newsletters.
one of the things I remember was I think it was Form 2000 in Washington, where after the forum we had all of you guys. I don't think you were there, Mike, but I know Walt, and Fred and Carlton were over at my house, and we
Yep.
had a picture of the IIUG presidents there.
Yep.
That was really a fun event, and I thought that would be a good. That's the picture I want to use to end this.
You know what else that happened in this period, and I don't know if it happened under Fred's leadership or not, but they came up with the what they call it, the Founders Award, the IIUG
Directors Award.
Directors Award. You know, the hand with the globe and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. That was Miss Christine Shannon.
Okay.
I think that was who you know put that effort together and funded it.
I was going to say you can't see it. I still have mine over here on the on the shelf off in the corner.
Yeah,
I
I
think-
have mine. I have mine in my office too. You can't see it because we're in the RV, but I do have it.
Well, it's going to be smart to have his right there, right?
I think my head is blocking mine.
Yeah. And mine's in my office. I'm sitting someplace else, but I remember that I think Walt got it. I think Walt was the first.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. They gave 2, sometimes 3 away. I think I know Jonathan Leffler was in there fairly early. It was a nice way of recognizing people who have really contributed to the organization.
Who wants to say some last words, or shall I just pick people randomly?
Well, being as how I had sort of wandered off, I'm not sure. Other than the fact that it took off and continued to grow and grow exponentially after I kind of got out of the loop. I was thinking to myself here recently, gee, you kind of wandered off. On the other hand, I had sort of been working pretty closely with this since the late 80s, early 90s, and so I figured it was time to give it a rest. So, but I can't imagine a better set of people that could have followed on, even the people on the broadcast here or all the other folks. It's been one of my tenets that good people attract and keep good people. And Kathy Kipp alluded to this to a certain extent on the last presentation, but I think it's been a great set of folks. Maybe it was just luck. I kind of doubt it, that so many good people hung around and did so much hard work. It's a testament to how much they believed in what they were doing and the changes they were making. So I think it's been great. Couldn't have picked a better set of folks.
Yeah, I like to say they're accidents in history, and I think there's one accident where we had a super great product, and I think both 4GL as a language was a great product, and the database engine as it was designed, and then 2, we had some great people involved, and all of you and the Informix engineers. It was just, John Leffler. I really enjoy going back and seeing some of the old stuff that because there's some real talent there, and that's it's been a great group to work with.
I wish I could call all the people, but Madison Pruitt comes to mind, and the fellow up in the Northwest, whose name I can't call now, but who did so much work.
John Miller.
Yeah.
John Miller and Scott Lashley.
Yeah, all those guys.
You know what I thought was phenomenal as IIUG grew was that as of course it became a little bit more complicated to run because we had a lot of irons on the fire, right? I mean, thousands of people putting forth ideas, and I'm very proud of this, we never lost our focus on the user. This is all about the user. And it made for some uncomfortable moments with the vendor, but it certainly we certainly gained credibility and respect from the vendor because we were ultimately positive contributors to the path they were taking with the product. It was very collegiate. I remember so so much so that people developed tremendous friendships over time through collaboration, right? And it was disinterested collaboration. It was this group had no it was not an entity until much later. And we were a group. We didn't even have a bank account, and yet we got amazing things done.
From my perspective, looking back to the beginning, looking at the notes from the board meetings and so forth, you take the IIUG and you look at it today as just something you have. It's like the internet. Oh, we just have it. But you don't realize where it came from and all the work that it took to get there. And that's what I reflected on and what I found most interesting and also most proud of is just the massive amount of hard work that everyone did all the way through the founding and the kickoff and moving forward. And it's something that I look back on with a tremendous amount of pride that I was able to fulfill or be part of that whole thing. Um, it, it I can't put it into words. I'm just so proud of what we all did and what it became and what we were able to accomplish. And I'm, like I said, I'm so grateful for the experience and the tremendous people that I got to meet and work with through the whole thing. So thank you. Thank you very much.
All right,
Awesome.
you guys. Well, thanks so much for reaching out to me. I was wondering, this was so out of my space. I was like, what? I had to polish up for this, but it was fun.
Good. That's to me the important thing is this was fun, and it's so good to see everybody, and I appreciate all the time we've spent over the years working together. It's
Yeah,
been an
me too,
awesome group.
for sure.
Indeed.
Thank you guys. You all have a good night.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye all.
Take care. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.